Hi everyone, welcome back to Deanne's POV podcast. My name is Deanne, and I am so glad to have you guys here with me as always. So let's get into the episode. So, a little life update. I have been having so much change in my life lately. Like, if you guys follow me on socials, you guys know that me and my sister are starting a hijab brand, which is so exciting because honestly, it wasn't in the cards for me at all. Like, I never thought about going into business. Something just popped up, and like, why not do it? Like, it was right there. You know what I mean? And we're also like moving in a couple of months, which is so exciting. Just a lot of change happening all at once. And yeah, I'm honestly here for it. Like, I feel like I needed a change after so many years. So yeah. I am gonna start the episode here, and I wanted to start by saying that our brains and our bodies are so sensitive to information, to every information that we give it. And we all know that we're like born with like primary instincts or whatever, but everything else is secondary to us. Like, we have to learn beliefs, we have to learn our values, and just like how we view the world is all shaped by what we are learning and what we are exposed to. Especially like when we're younger or like when we're growing up, we are more sensitive to it because it's like a critical period for brain development, since we all know like our brains don't develop until like what, 25. So it's like our brains are underdeveloped, and due to that sensitive period, we're more prone to being conditioned and like having certain beliefs. And when we have those beliefs, it's going to stick a lot harder because those synapses that occur in our brain are a lot stronger. And the more we reinforce it, the stronger it gets, right? So I would say like when I was younger, I was kind of like an avoidant personality. Like, I was an introvert, I was a quiet person. Um and I just wanted to avoid any sort of like consequence. So I would always like think it out and just be like, okay, I'm just gonna take this route and try to avoid the consequences as much as possible. So I would say like I just convinced myself of that. I was like, you can just avoid it by this, that. And I guess like there's like when you start thinking like that, there's always like a fear factor as well, because it was like you don't want the consequences, you're scared of the consequences, and the more you reinforce that in your brain, the stronger it gets. So it was just like something I had to work on personally to kind of get out of that mindset. And I would say like after I noticed that, I was like, okay, like you gotta like just rip the band-aid and you have to like say no. And ever since I started saying no, life has been good. Like, when I put myself first like that, it's been good. And it's funny because like I feel like when you start to think about it, that's when your fight or flight comes in, right? Because it's like, well, if you do this, like, this is the million like outcomes that could happen. Um so like what I've been trying to practice is like when I can't do something and I know I can't do something, or it's out of my way and I prefer not to, before I can even think of like the outcomes, I just go, no, I can't do it, I'm sorry. And it's funny because a lot of the time they're like the person's reaction is like, oh, okay, that's fine. And it's like, wow, like they're really not bothered by that at all. So why is it so hard for like me to say no in a situation, right? Obviously now I'm just like, no thank you, no thank you. And it's like, I'm fine now. Like, it took me a while to kind of like break that cycle. But when it comes to like people pleasing, it's like linked it in your brain, like you started to believe that it's gonna be some sort of negative outcome, right? Even if it is a negative outcome, that's totally fine. Like, it's totally fine if that person gets upset, because it's like you're still putting yourself first, so you can't do it. So why? So it's like they're gonna get over it at the end of the day. You know what I mean? And I always say this, but like when like our brains and our bodies are just so smart, like they want to protect you from any uncomfort, right? They don't want you to put yourself in a dangerous situation. And it's like, okay, like this is a no, because like it's dangerous for you, like it's not good for you. And I feel like a lot of these pathways that we go through, a lot of like the fear, fight or flight, whatever, they all respond to every single type of fear the same. And that's like when rational fear versus irrational fear comes into play, because it's like, okay, like rational fear, getting chased by a tiger, that is a very rational fear because you can die. And it's like your survival instincts are gonna kick in, and it's like your amygdala is gonna be hyper, and it's gonna be on alarm, like it's alarm setting. And obviously now you're gonna like run for your life, because it's like a tiger is chasing you. It's a rational fear. Like if you're gonna die, it's a rational fear. If you're not gonna die, it's a irrational fear, right? And I feel like nowadays, like in the comfort of our homes, we're obviously not gonna go get chased by a freaking lion or a tiger. Maybe in some scenarios, but it's like all our fears now, like we link fear and like all that to so many irrational things. Like that person is gonna be mad at me, or I have a fear of cats. Let me just put that out there. Or like I don't like being around cats, even though I know that this cat could possibly do nothing to harm me. It's like this idea of I'm in danger, right? So it's the same pathways. I'm in danger. I need to get out of this situation as soon as possible. So when it comes to saying no and trying to like get out of that people pleasing mentality, our amygdala actually interprets that as a threat. So it triggers our fight and flight, like our anxiety's through the roof, and it's releasing cortisol and adrenaline because it's like you're in danger. Like you can't say no in this situation. So your body will try to like push you to avoid it and just say yes. You know what I mean? And it's like the more you reinforce that, right? The more you're just like, I can't say no, or I have to do what this person is telling me to do, or X, Y, and Z is gonna happen. You're gonna reinforce that, like that pathway in your brain, that synapses that occurred. And the more you reinforce it, the stronger it gets, the harder it is to break. And it's like, it makes sense, you know what I mean? That it's gonna be really hard to break. And I don't know if you guys knew this, but I was like reading up on it, because I was like, you know, when you do something nice for somebody and you kind of feel good about it after, right? So I was like, what if these two things are linked? So I kind of like looked into it, and what I found out was honestly not surprising, but it was also very interesting, because when we're in that people pleasing mentality and we kind of like say yes and do what the person like told us to do, and we, even if we have to like bend backwards for it, we'll like at the end of the day we will get a dopamine hit, right? And dopamine is addicting. Like it's one of the most addicting neurochemicals that we have in our brain. So it's like this constant dopamine hit that you're getting the more you want to do it. It's just like any other drug, right? When you get that dopamine hit, that sense of euphoria, you want to do it again. So it's like your body's also like reinforcing it via chemicals in your brain. It's like, oh, like you will feel so good after bending backwards for this person right now. Like just do it and you will get that dopamine hit. And as I said before, like dopamine itself, the first time you get that dopamine hit, it's going to feel great. The second time is going to feel okay. But you're going to constantly chase that sense of like that, like the same feeling that you got when you got that first dopamine hit. And you're going to tell yourself that, or at least your brain is going to tell you that it's going to feel so good to get that dopamine hit. So you're going to do more and more, and you're going to fall deeper and deeper into this people pleasing mentality. And yeah. So the more that we get validation from saying yes, the more our brains seek that reward, which keeps us trapped in the cycle of putting others' needs before ours. And I also feel like when it comes to people pleasing, there's always like a linkage to social anxiety, right? Because anxiety develops when we're constantly like in this fear state, or we're overworking our fight or flight systems, right? And it will lead to some sort of anxiety long term. So it's like, so in this case, like you would develop some sort of social anxiety where you want to avoid conflict, you don't want to say the wrong thing to somebody, and that can also kind of lead to like avoidance altogether of like talking to people that you're not comfortable with, or it's just like limiting you from having certain conversations or making new friends and so on and so forth, right? And I feel like it all just boils down to getting external validation. And a lot of it also has to do with your experiences throughout childhood, especially through childhood. And it's just like how you're conditioned to behave. Because like, have you guys ever seen like those experiments with like dogs, or like you ring a bell and at first they don't know what it means, but then when you constantly ring the bell and you bring out food, that means bell equals food, therefore they're gonna start like salivating or something. Anywho, I'm getting off track here, but yeah, so when you're younger, you're conditioned in a way, right? And that kind of like aligns with the attachment theory, where there's like an emotional bond that you form with your caregiver when you're a child, and that relationship and behavior will lead to people pleasing throughout adulthood, right? And people become like they have like an anxious attachment style because of their fear of rejection or their fear of abandonment. And that would just make them put the relationship above themselves. Like they would try their best to maintain the relationship at all costs, even like at the cost of their own well-being, right? So it's like, it's very deep rooted. And I feel like if we are in a situation of people pleasing in general, it's going to be extremely hard to get out of, but it is possible, you know what I mean? Because our brains will form new synapses, and there's always like an extinction when it comes to like unlearning something. Like you can unlearn anything. It's just like a matter of time and effort that you put into it. So the key to breaking this cycle and managing your fear is to first recognize that saying no and putting yourself first is not about rejecting somebody else, but protecting ourselves and our well-being. And I feel like the best way to do so is exposure therapy. And for this, you can start off small, right? You can start saying small to smaller situations and then just gradually build off of that. And then you will basically convince your brain that, and start to believe that saying no does not have negative connotations, and you're not rejecting anybody, but putting yourself first. So you're just like switching the narrative in your brain, and you're basically convincing yourself of, like, in that sense. And another thing is like realizing that this fear is an irrational fear, and instead of helping, like, it doesn't help you in any way, shape, or form, but it holds you back. So for like certain fears, like if you're actually, getting chased by a tiger, that's rational fear. Like that's when your fear systems are working properly. But like in today's world, it's easy to manifest like smaller fears, like the fear of rejection or fear of conflict and stuff like that. So if it's not life threatening, you need to like acknowledge the fact that it's not a life threatening thing. Therefore, you are okay, you are safe, and you are able to make a rational decision at this point. And obviously, we have social anxiety that kind of keeps us trapped in our own mind and like trying to find the worst case scenario. But I feel like when you first say no, even though it's awkward, you will finally like realize that this fear wasn't as big as it seemed. Saying no is all about setting boundaries, protecting your time and your energy, and valuing your own needs. So each time we say no, we're kind of like reclaiming our power and teaching others to respect boundaries, right? Because it's all about respect at the end of the day. You don't want to overstep somebody's boundaries, and it's not necessarily selfish. So because it's like necessary for our health and to live like a fulfilling life. So it's kind of like building muscles, because like whenever you're uncomfortable and you push through it, you're like growing and growing stronger, you know what I mean? Anywho, to set boundaries, the first thing that you need to do is self-reflect. So you need to understand why you feel like you need validations from others, right? You need that approval from others. Then you need to ask yourself if you're like compromising your values doing this, and if it aligns with who you truly are. And I feel like the best way to do that is journaling. Journaling got me through a lot, you guys, but just like being able to write it down all on paper and then just like evaluate it yourself and be like, does this align with who I am? And I feel like that's like when you also like define what your values are. You need to like know what you stand for and what matters to you. And when you understand your values, it's easier to stop seeking that external validation, and you get to like stand your ground in your own beliefs, even when others may not agree with it, right? And it's okay if others don't agree with your like values and beliefs, because they're your values and beliefs. It has nothing to do with John across the street. So yeah, just like stick with it, stick with who you truly are, and you will honestly be 10 times more happier. And another thing is that you need to kind of build your self-confidence and embrace your uniqueness. Show a little love to yourself. And I feel like when you like actually love yourself, then you wouldn't need as much external validation, and you won't go and seek it from like somebody else, because you're already validating yourself. Another thing is you should always surround yourself with people who appreciate you for who you are rather than who you think they want you to be, right? And honestly, the best way to do that is to be like 100% yourself, your little goofy, weird self. And if they're here for that, they're here for that. If they're not, then they gotta go. Like, it's not like they're a bad person in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying that at all. But it's like, it's not the person for you. You know what I mean? I always tell people that I'm totally fine with people not liking me, because if we're not gonna vibe, we're not gonna vibe, and it's nobody's fault. And I'm not gonna force somebody to like me. But if we don't vibe, we don't vibe. And that's totally fine with me, because I'm gonna go vibe with somebody that catches the same energy as like that I have. You know what I mean? So it's like, just like find your people. You'll eventually find your people. You know what I mean? And I feel like when you do that, you're kind of like reflecting on the relationships that you have, right? So is it somebody that is like supporting you and also respecting your boundaries? Or like, is this somebody that requires you to bend backwards, or like show a certain side of yourself and just like be that kind of like pick me energy? Those relationships gotta go, because they're not good for you at all. Like mentally, it's not good for you, because it's gonna kind of like push you back into that mentality that you don't want, the one that you're trying to grow from. So pick the relationships where people are respecting your boundaries, and in that case, you also have to like communicate your boundaries clearly. Like, I feel like it's super awkward when you have to communicate it, because it's like, hey, like, crossing the line. But when you're like setting your boundaries, you have to be firm about it, and then they like be respectful, but still like set the boundaries, because this is how you protect your own peace. And like, don't try to like beat around the bush, just be as direct as possible. But you can always like take the general approach, just like, hey, like, you like overstep this boundary, like that's where the line is, like, please don't do that again, you know what I mean? You can be polite about it, you don't have to like come off strong. So yeah, so just like think about why you're scared of saying no to something, why you fear like these irrational outcomes or whatever it is, and start small. Say no to something when you feel uncomfortable, and kind of just like build off of that to build your boundaries, right? So every time you say no, you're kind of like reclaiming your own power and building a healthy relationship with yourself. And when you build that healthy relationship with yourself, and you're like, your brain is healthy, your body's healthy, you give off good energy, you can kind of like put all that kindness and stuff into the world. Like, you love yourself, but you also gotta love others, you know what I mean? And I don't know, I just like, I feel like when you really take the time to do that, you find a lot more happiness in day-to-day life, and it would just like, it feels great. Anywho, before I end this episode, I don't know if I told you guys, but I've been into poetry lately. Like, I've been buying a lot of like poetry books, and I honestly never knew I was gonna like poetry, but apparently I do. And I just wanted to give you guys a little quote from this book that I recently got. It's called Inward by Young Pueblo. I probably just butchered his name, but you know, it is what it is. I apologize in advance, but this was a little quote that I kind of like read yesterday, and I was like, this is so good for the episode. So it says, "It is not love if all they want from you is to fulfill their expectations." And I feel like that fits so well in this episode. So that's what I wanted to leave you guys with. Anywho, just a reminder before I go, I know I said this a million times, but saying no is prioritizing yourself. It's not selfish. And it's also okay to choose yourself, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Okay, so that is all I have for today's episode. Thank you so much again for joining me today. If you do like this episode, don't forget to leave a comment and review. It would mean the world. And yeah, if you guys ever want to connect with me, I am on Instagram at RiansPOV, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye.